Awesome.
Hey everybody, it's Comic Boom here with another collaboration with Jason from the Get Fresh crew with Weirdscience DC, Weirdscience Manga, Weirdscience Marvel podcast, and comic
We
book.
cover it all. Yes, we do.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you back, Jason. I know that Jim looks like you might be more permanent because Jim's a very busy guy reviewing a lot of comics, and I always enjoy reviewing these comics with you. And we got a somewhat of an eclectic array of comic books this week. And so why don't you tell people what we have in store for them?
Well, we are going to be talking about some number 2 issues. I don't think we have any brand new number 1s this week. We have Immortal Sargeant number 2 by Joe Kelly. That was following up on that number 1 issue that we both love so much. And then we're going to talk about Art Brut number 3, which was that crazy art-based comic by the folks who give us Ice Cream Man. And then we'll be finishing up with Nightclub number 3 by Mark Millar and checking on those teenage vampires and see what they've been up to.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess we'll jump right into it. We'll jump right into Immortal Sargeant issue 2. I'll go first on this. I got to tell you, Immortal Sargeant. This is this very simple story written by Joe Kelly. This is only I think it's only 8 issues long, or 8 or 9 issues long, and this seemingly simple story about a sergeant named Jim Sargeant who just doesn't want to retire.
Sargeant, yes.
Yeah, Sargeant. And the first issue. Wow, the first issue, we just got to know this guy, and we got to know this Jim Sargeant, sort of independent of his family, and we just sort of got to know him as a guy who's sort of living by himself. He's divorced. We know he has some children, and we know that his entire life is basically his work for the police department, and he doesn't want to retire. He really doesn't want to retire. And this issue, I got to tell you, I enjoyed the first issue, but this issue, I laughed my ass off. I found this so funny, this issue, and I laughed for all the inappropriate reasons, because this is not a politically correct character by any stretch of the imagination. And I was surprised where the humor and the dialogue took me. I was very pleasantly surprised. What about yourself?
Well, I'm hoping you can convince me that, because I didn't care for this issue nearly as much as the first one. The first issue, we meet Sargeant, and yeah, sure, he's crusty, he's hard to get along with, he's, bumps into things, and he doesn't make way for other people, but he seemed to be generally a good guy, right? He's good at his job, he takes care of people, he can go places and fit in and have a good time and some laughs. Where in this issue, he's just a miserable SOB, and there's really very little. You don't see that. Okay, why should we like him? You just see the negative aspects of him, and I kind of thought, oh, where's the fun that I was having with him in that first issue? So tell me where you found that fun.
Well, here's where I almost feel like maybe I should apologize for liking this, because
no, that's great.
Because
liking is good.
Because this is a character who he's got an ex-wife who left him for another woman, and he's homophobic. He's got a son that he thinks is a pussy and a wimp, and he criticizes his son because his son Michael essentially works for a gaming company, and in his view his son is basically lazy and just makes video games for social retards. That's a quote: social retards who can't get laid. He's very opinionated, and he's very much a jerk, and yet the grandchildren seem to love their grandpa, but he's teaching them, when he plays cops and robbers with his own grandkids, he basically telling them, he's saying, yeah, you got to take the bad guy, and you got extra points if you throw him in jail and you dispense with the Miranda. He really comes across like hard-nosed and very much kind of a jerk. He doesn't even know how to apologize to his ex-wife for being very derogatory.
Mhm.
There's a part of me that's
We saw
surprised
hints.
that.
This is the ex-wife we saw hints of last time because she had left him some I think it was hippie food he called it, organic sprouts and stuff in his refrigerator. So we knew there was still an ongoing kind of relationship there. So this is our first time seeing her on panel. And
Yeah.
the son too is kind of a not very redeemable character. I mean, they he seems I think he owns his own game company it seems, but he doesn't ship any product. He keeps tinkering, 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 never actually sends anything off. And it seems like, yeah, he's a bad character, or unlikable character in one way. His dad's an unlikable character in another way. They're both kind of not very shown as very competent, but their wives and ex-wives' wives are shown as competent, which I got a little bit tired of by the end of the issue. I wanted to see a win for either the son or for the sergeant. And they didn't get any wins at all in this issue, not even for a moment.
And that's that's a very interesting observation, and what overrode that for me, and I completely agree with you that they never got a win. But I found myself, I read this over the noon hour today, and coworkers were telling me what I was laughing loud enough that they're asking me what I was laughing at. In a sense, I'm surprised that Joe Kelly almost. I love the fact that he's got the courage and the balls to get away with some of the dialogue that is contained in this story. I found it humorous. It is. I can absolutely see some of this dialogue being offensive to some readers. And that's why I said maybe I should apologize for liking it. But and there's no question that maybe it does say something about my own idiosyncrasies. And but I what I particularly like though is through the humor you can see the frailties and the weaknesses of Jim Sargeant as a father. And that's where I think that thing, what I'm hoping for, Jason, is that some of the things that you were hoping to see, some of those redeeming
Mm-hmm.
qualities, is going to be coming through in the issues to follow. This is only an 8 or 9 issue series, so it's going to be interesting to see what that where that takes us. Michael, Jim Sargent's son, Michael's wife is a lawyer. She's, as you said, she's very competent. His Jim's own wife is very competent as well, and and even the grandchildren seem to be, I mean, they're lovable kids, but they all, Jim wants, at the beginning here, Jim goes out of his way. He doesn't even want his son to come over. He doesn't even want to have a retirement party. He's shunning his own family. And so it is hard to get the impression that this is someone that embraces family. So I agree with you there that, what started off in the first issue as someone who his entire life is his work. And then here we have in this issue, not only is his entire life his work, he's even on a family outing with his family. And he still brings up and he talks inappropriately about investigations and murder scenes that are highly inappropriate for kids, and yet he does so again. I think in a humorous way. Obviously, the humor hit with me; it didn't hit with you. And let me ask you this: was this a complete turnoff for you? Did you find yourself just taken out of this story, or what?
It felt like I wasn't getting what I was hoping to get from this issue. Now, maybe this is the plan all along, right? Maybe to get Hegelian on you a little bit. You got the thesis, you got the antithesis, and you put them together. Maybe next issue we get the synthesis of these multiple sides of this character.
Yeah.
I just watched a YouTube video about Hegel, so sorry to bring that up.
No,
But yeah, it just didn't, it wasn't what I was expecting. And there was one panel I really did love here. It was a double page spread, probably hard for you to show, but it's the one that shows the sergeant and his son shaking hands with each other. It's page 23 in my copy here. And it shows the son being super teeny tiny in one corner and the sergeant looming over him huge in the other corner. Yeah, that's one side of it. There we go. And I thought that was a really good use of the artistic medium here, just to show their relative feelings about and towards each other, especially how the son feels about his dad taking up all the air in the room, taking up the whole room. So I thought that was a nice panel. I just wanted some more. You found more fun in it than I did. I wanted to see more about that old case, that cold case that he couldn't solve. I wanted to see more of him hanging out in that bar where he could actually joke around with a waitress who would give him crap back the same way he gave her some crap. I didn't see him. I wanted to see some interplay of him and some other characters in a way that didn't feel really uncomfortable. And I know that was intentional. We're not supposed to feel comfortable with the Sargeant in this issue. We're supposed to think, ooh, this is not the right way to live. This isn't a great way to interact with your family. So again, we've got, I'm pretty sure this is a 9-issue series. So we've got 7 more issues to see all the various sides of this guy and his family. And I'm sure we'll get back to that case. It just wasn't what I was looking for this week.
Well, I think you're right when you say it's heavy-handed. The humor saved it for me. I thought it was comical, but there's no question that I never really thought of it in terms of. I mean, there really is. You're absolutely right. There is no win here. There is genuinely nothing likable about Jim Sargeant. There was even a hint there. I thought that maybe because Jim Sargeant here, maybe the lead character, I thought maybe he even has a little bit of PTSD, but I don't think he does. I think he's just really good at his job, but his job is his entire life, and he seems to be disappointed in his son, disappointed in his wife. He finds something to complain about everything. I mean, arguably the only factions of his family that he seems to sort of get along with are the grandkids. But even the grandkids, he only gets along with them because they put him on a pedestal because he's grandpa and he tells them stories that he's not supposed to. So, which is, kind of a cheat, really, when you think about it. So, but I am curious to see where this goes because, what happens when he's, retired? What is his life going to be? What's left in retirement if your entire life was your job and you don't have your job anymore? This could end up being a depressing tale. So I'm actually curious to know where Joe Kelly is going with this, or if there's going to be. I really, by the way, I love your words that you use there: a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Maybe we'll get that up. I'm gonna steal that from you for future reviews. But yeah, well, what would you give this then?
Well, I was thinking again, I think the word I was missing here was charm. In the first issue, he was a cantankerous SOB, but he was a charming cantankerous SOB, right? He was more of your Archie Bunker, your George Jefferson, your cranky character who does the wrong thing, but you can't help but love him. In this issue, I could help but love him. So I'm hoping that comes back. So in this issue, I got to go down to like 6.5.
Wow. Yeah, that's I'm not going to be as low as you. Not surprisingly, because the humor hit with me, and again, that might say far more about me than the writer and anyone else. And so I'm gonna give it a solid. I'm gonna give it a solid 7.5 because I haven't laughed this hard in a long time, and the humor just happened to hit with me. Maybe it was just the mood I was in over lunch, and so. I'm really curious as to where this is going to go because
that's great. I'm really hoping that issue 3 comes out and I say, oh, that's what Joe Kelly was doing. That's what he was setting up. Now it makes sense to me. And now I retroactively like that issue better. But as of right now, Weirdscience, we do not fake the funk. I got to say, this one didn't hit for me.
All right. Well, maybe the next comic we review, Art Brut number 3, you have a different opinion of, and we'll deal with that now. And that is, why don't you start us off with that?
Yes, this is Art Brut number 3, Sotto Voce, Under One's Breath, written by W. Maxwell Prince, art by Martin Morazzo, colors by Matt Lopes, backup colors for the backup part of the book, I'm sure, by Chris O'Halloran, and letters by good old Neon. And yeah, this continues the adventures of our kind of crazy Arthur Brut, who has this power of being able to dive into paintings and interact with the characters there. And we saw him try to do that with Mona Lisa, but somebody had killed her already. And in this issue, he dives into the Scream to talk with his old buddy Vox.
Yeah. And why don't you explain to maybe people listening, particularly on the podcast, because this will go up on the Weirdscience Indie podcast. What exactly is the Scream? Could you maybe describe? It's a classic work of art. Why don't you describe a little bit about it? Because I think you're probably better inclined to that than me.
Beyond, it's not a realistic painting. It's these swirling colors, and there's a bridge. And there's this just almost implied figure of a man in the foreground. And he's just got his hands up to his mouth and he's eyes wide open. Maybe a woman, maybe a man, can't even tell. It's practically a stick figure, but it's just this essence of screaming at the world. And I think it just distills this feeling we've all had of things aren't right. I don't like this. I want this to stop. And it's like he's doing this for the whole world. It's painted by Edvard Munch. I'm going to try to pronounce that. Some sort of a Scandinavian artist. And yeah,
Yeah.
so if things are going wrong in the art world, Arthur Brut thinks that Vox, which is what he calls this guy, is probably the person to check in on.
Yeah, and what I find interesting here is that if you juxtapose the Scream, the painting of the Scream against the Mona Lisa is this painting about serenity and calmness and control, and you can compare that to the Scream, which is about anxiety and about feeling pressure and about not being good enough, alienation, sure, and the fact that the antagonist of this story appears to be this character who is who's working at this Kinsville Institute for the creative arts and for play therapy. He dresses up like Andy Warhol, and he seems to have this. He seems to be. He teaches, it's revealed here, he teaches like 13 children, specific children whose parents have died. And all these children seem to have powers that they're dream
I'm pretty
painters.
sure he killed their parents, Rocky. I don't think the parents happen to die. I think the parents bring the kids in. He doesn't want to give the kids back. And so he makes it so there's no place else for them to go. That seems to be the implication.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it does seem, it's disturbing in and of itself. And he seems to put these children, and the one child that we focus on is this child named Dylan, who is discovered to be a dream painter. And Arthur Brut, the hero of the story, Arthur Brut, is also a dream painter, and he can enter paintings and basically solve crimes and solve things that, because if something goes wrong in a painting, it can have adverse effects in the real world. And so something is going on here, and it's all linked to this symbol of the winking man. And part of the mystery is, what's the winking man? What does the wink signify? It's an ideogram. We know that there are some students in a class were all died last issue, and that the teacher that was supposed to teach the class, he was suddenly called away, and he's interviewed in this particular issue by the Director Breslin of the I guess the Institute for it's a fancy art institute.
Oh,
yeah, the something for artistic affairs or integrity. The Institute for
Bureau of Artistic Integrity. BIA.
That's right. And it would appear. So, anyways, it would appear as if that this particular teacher who has these children, these dream painters, he puts them in a room and he traps. He seems to be against perfection, and there's a strong theme here of a rebellion against perfection.
What I'm getting here is that he's obsessed with perfection to the point where he thinks that anything that really exists cannot meet his definition of perfection.
Yeah.
So I think that he sees the world, sees that it's not perfect, and therefore. It even has this phrase here that his old student quoted back to him. It was something like, here it is, "The only sane response to imperfection is to destroy the imperfect thing." And that old student who was, name was Wunderlich, who was supposed to be the teacher at that art class, but got kicked out for Andy Warhol guy. He repeated like this, like it was a mantra that he had learned when he was a kid at the school all those years ago. So yeah. I think this guy's been doing it for a long time, and I really do think that now this whole book seems to be about reactions to imperfections in art. Even Arthur Brut himself, when Director Breslin's, I don't know if it's wife or girlfriend, is upset, Breslin says she's always this way when she starts a new project, and Arthur, being surprisingly lucid because he's kind of Looney Tunes, he says, that's what happens when you try to make something. You want it to be so perfect, but everything you do is just a betrayal of your hopes for the thing. Stuff comes out all wrong. It can drive you crazy.
Yeah.
Which we know he's kind of has been driven crazy. So I see these as two different responses to the artistic problem of imperfection. One response is to try to live in this beautiful, imperfect world in your beautiful, imperfect art. And the other response from this group called The Correction, what Dr. Oldenburg is part of, is it's imperfect, you got to destroy it.
And the winking eye is a symbol of the imperfection, that the eyeball on the dollar bill, the eyeball of the winking eye is a symbol of that imperfection that you see, that symbol at all the murder scenes where all these people are being killed. And what I can't help but to draw some analogies to, well, obviously every kind of art, but when you think about it, I mean, it's the imperfection that makes the art. Especially in the comic book industry, we talk about stylistic, right? Stylistic means the more you deviate from realistic looking art, it's more stylistic. Riley Rosmo has a more stylistic art than Jim Lee. But so you can say there's all kinds of imperfections in Riley Rosmo's art, but there is also in Jim Lee, but it's the imperfections that make the art. It reminds me of that beautiful phrase. It's sort of like, it's the silence between the notes that makes the music, or the space between the bars that cages the tagger. You never know where the art
difference
is.
between a drum machine and an actual drummer. The drum machine's more perfectly on the beat, but it's missing some kind of reality, some humanity that you'll hear in the actual guy hitting skins with sticks.
Yeah, and that eyeball is a theme that is a recurring theme throughout this issue, and in the one particularly graphic scene where Vox, the screaming man, ends up unfortunately succumbing to a rather grisly fate, his eyeball pops out. And so that symbol of the eyeball, that imperfection, is very clear throughout the story. And I just think that this works so well. I love a story that makes me think. I think that there's probably multiple different ways that one can identify different themes and different ways to make one think. One's own relationship with creativity is really on full display here. And that's why I got to give full props to writer W. Maxwell Prince and the pencils and inks by Martin Morazzo. I mean, they just do a really, truly wonderful job. And even how the antagonist of this story, this individual, this teacher that dresses up like Andy Warhol, it's no coincidence that they're all in white. That they're all in white because they're like a blank canvas. And the room that Dylan is in is completely white. Everything is blank because in his mind, perfection is almost nothing. And yet,
exactly. That's the only way to be perfect, is to have nothing there. The perfect suit is the suit with nothing on it, blank white. The perfect room is this blank white room. And that seems to be how these folks enter paintings. They don't have to be physically in the same place with a painting like Arthur Brut. They get into the paintings by going into this room, and I think by having someone with these certain abilities draw the painting, because it looks like Dylan starts to draw the scream, and then they end up in the same painting as Arthur. So it seems to be different routes into the art as well. I'm not sure exactly what that theme is trying to say, but I'm interested in thinking about it some more.
Yeah, agreed. And I just, again, it's just so fascinating. I think I'm not sure how this is going to basically resolve itself, but I think that I like the theme because it makes me think and sort of evaluate, because we all know that art is subjective. You and I can disagree on whether or not we like a variant cover or this art or that art, and there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to art. So then how would you possibly define perfection? Well, we know how the bad guy in this comic book does. He doesn't like anything. It's nothing. Give me nothing. But of course, that's horrible. I mean, imagine a world where there's literally nothing, and is that the perfect world? Well, it is to the villain here. So you can really see that if you really let your imagination go, that's a pretty powerful villain here. If nothingness is what he wants to achieve, because that's his idea of perfection, and he gets enough for these dream painter children together to exert that kind of influence on the world through the works of art that we've come to know over the centuries. There's a lot at stake here. So I was quite impressed with this.
There is, and we don't really know exactly what the Correction's end game is, right? We don't know what their overall goal is. Are they just out to cause chaos, kind of like the Joker? It doesn't seem like that. They seem like the kind of folks that have a more philosophically defined goal. And there's only one issue left in the series, and there seems to be a whole lot still to wrap up. So yeah. I'm hoping that Maxwell Prince here is able to pull that off, and he seems to have done well so far, and maybe it'll be wrapped up nice and neat, and we'll see what happens. Or maybe that'll be the point, that it doesn't wrap up so neatly, and it's left for us to try to interpret and go back and and see what he was trying to tell us.
Yeah, and we would be lax if we didn't also mention that there is also a backup story that essentially tells a past adventure of Arthur Brut, where he somehow exorcises a demon from a classic painting of I forget the name of the painting.
American Gothic.
Right, classic painting, and so it's just
yeah. The one day devil horns and a pitchfork show up on the farmer in the painting. Pretty funny.
Yeah, and not much happens other than he gets the devil. He returns the devil to Fuseli's Nightmare, which is apparently a famous painting as well.
This was a demon from another painting who wound up in the American Gothic painting, and I'm pretty sure this is a less famous painting, at least one I don't know as much about. I'm pretty sure I've seen this image before. It's very arresting. It's called The Nightmare. And it shows a woman sleeping, or at least sprawled out on a lounge, and this little horrific little man sitting on her chest. And whether that's what it feels like to have a nightmare. There's this horse peeking in from the background. Looking at it feels like a nightmare, and that the pieces don't really fit together realistically, but the emotions do. So that's kind of a neat connection there. And again, these backups are the only new bits to the story. This story had been published a few years ago under a different name, coming out now as Art Brut, with these kind of golden age style past adventures of Arthur as little extra bonus backups.
And it's what the backup made me realize was that it was almost a little bit, part of it was a little bit at odds with the main narrative in terms of the theme that was running through my head, because the reason why the devil in the Nightmare painting went over to American Gothic was because he felt that the woman, the couple, the old farming couple holding the picket, that they actually look miserable, that the couple doesn't look happy, that when people often associate, when they look at that American Gothic painting, they think of maybe an old style family farm classic, but there is another interpretation of it. The woman arguably does look a little bit maybe unkind. Arguably she could look a little straight faced. Maybe she's miserable. Maybe she's depressed. Maybe she's melancholy. I mean, these works of art that we know, that we love, a lot of these works of art they don't necessarily convey a lot of joy and happiness. And so one has to ask, well, if some of them were destroyed, what would the world lose? So I think it's important to have that type of expression, even the negative aspects, emotional aspects of humanity through our art. But I think that just sort of reinforces the idea that art doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to convey something positive, because a lot of times it conveys something negative. And so I felt that was a little bit of a juxtaposition from what the first chapter was saying. So that's why I'm a little bit curious to know if Maxwell is going to he's going to go with, Maxwell Prince is going to be going with this storyline, because I just love this. I hope for more future adventures. I can't believe there's only one issue left. Frustrating.
Yeah, it's always nice when you want more rather than, oh my God, is this story still going? So he seems to be a kind of guy who has things he wants to say, and he knows how long he wants to say it. And here we go. So yeah, I am very curious how he wraps this up, because we don't know much at all about Dylan and what he's been doing over in the Art Institute. We don't know much about what the villain's goal is, and we don't really know much about how they're going to fight back. It feels like the start of a story, but we've only got 22 or so more pages to go.
Yeah.
And again, if you really want to see how it ends, the answer is out there in the previous version of this book, but I'm being good and I'm going one issue at a time as they come out in this new edition.
Yeah. We would be lax again if we didn't give a shout out to the amazing cover art. The cover art, which is partially blocked by my face, but I would check. Guys, Google Art Brut #3. There's an homage to the Screaming Man work of art, or the Scream on the cover. It looks amazing. And there's also a homage to Andy Warhol's famous Campbell's soup image, which is very popular in pop art. And so I absolutely love the variant covers for this. And I normally hate variant covers because there's too damn many of them. But this is definitely one of those series where it's appropriate. And the artists who are doing these covers understand that, you know, how to make the covers relevant to the subject matter. And it's a perfect blend of artistic and artistic cover with the story itself.
Yeah, the variant artists understand the assignment, and I think there's only 2 variants per issue, so
Yeah.
it's not crazy like whatever that new Superman #1 was with 14, 15, 20 covers, whatever they had.
Yeah. So, how was what would you give this?
Oh, it's again because it's more like art and less like a regular superhero kind of story. It's harder to put a number on it, but in words, I'll say, yeah, you should read this. If you're a comic reader, you should read these 4 issues. And if I want to translate that into a number, I don't know, call it a 9.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go. I enjoyed this. I'm gonna go at 9.2. I'm gonna go at 9.2 just to be different. I could copy you, but I'm gonna go a little higher
Sure.
because I really
Get those
enjoyed
calipers
this.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, I just enjoy this. This is such a nice deviation from what I normally review with his, which is of course mostly DC and stuff. But I just really enjoy this. This is epitomizes the joy of indie comic book reading when I get something that is so refreshing like this that sort of makes me actually think about something other than just your blind, superhero fisticuffs. So I applaud this issue.
Speaking of superhero fisticuffs, we have some of that coming up too, and that's not so much of a bad thing. It's just a different kind of a thing, and that's the great part about comics, indie comics. There's space for all of it, including he transitions to Nightclub #3, which is written by our friend Mark Millar and drawn by Juanan Ramirez, where our crazy teenage vampires have been running wild and they maybe get into a little more trouble than they had planned for. And we get a really cool twist in this issue as well, which I always love.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll just have you continue to talk about it a little bit more. I'm just going to set it up for those watching on the stream here.
Sure. We have our kid Danny. And so remember, thinking back, he had wanted to be a famous YouTuber kid, and who wouldn't want to be a famous YouTuber? So he had his friends videotape him doing something stupid on a roof, which ended up having him being something stupid as he plummeted down to the sidewalk. And the story we were told is that he was so messed up, he was either possibly going to die or be in really bad shape. This detective, Nick Lascaris, comes in, turns him into a vampire, says he's going to recruit him into some kind of an army against evil. And we didn't see Nick at all last time. And meanwhile, our dumbass teen Danny goes off and says, hey, this is really cool. I have all these crazy powers. I'm fast. I'm strong. Sure, I can't go out in the sun, but big deal. I like to stay up late at night anyway. I'm a teenager. So he turns his 2 best friends into vampires too, and they start running around and having fun as well. And in this issue, we find out that some things are not quite what they seem, especially with Detective Nick Lascaris.
Yeah, this actually threw me for a loop a little bit. Even though on the surface this maybe is a little bit. It could be accused of being tropey, but I actually it caught me by surprise. I like the fact that these are 3 kids. They got these vampire powers, and it's like we're really getting to know the neighborhood that they grow up in. We're getting to know the school that they're part of and the friendships that they have and the crushes that they have and the loves that they have. And they're acting like you would essentially expect teenagers to do who've got extraordinary powers. They perhaps naively believe that they can maintain a secret identity while going around their neighborhood utilizing their vampire powers, and actually they're interfering in the drug trade, and they're helping people, and they're doing it aggressively. They're making money doing it, and they're getting away with it. But more and more people, because of social media, there's a social media profile of them, and it's getting more and more difficult for them to sort of hide their activities, their nocturnal activities. And what really stood out to me in this particular issue is how there was 2 moments that really stood out for me that I didn't see coming. And that is, of course, kudos to Mark Millar here. There are significant weaknesses that shortcomings that vampires have. Namely, they have to be invited into a premises, and they can't cross a river, and they can't cross water, and there's a little bit more to this, and they don't know who else is a vampire. And so I like all these moving parts as Millar is moving them into place.
Yeah, so yeah, Danny invited his friends, invited by, biting him in the neck, I mean, invited his friends into this lifestyle without really knowing any of the downsides. Again, very teenage, it seems cool, let's do it, damn the consequences. So they start running around trying to be superheroes, kind of reminiscent of the Shazam movie at first. There was a section in there where he tried to show off. And for a while it goes fine, but then they try to take out this group of terrorists in a hotel room or apartment somewhere, and that's where they can't go into the room. So we set up the idea that vampires can only go in if invited, and Danny gets shot in the head, which is not that big a deal because he can heal so well. But then the whole place just blows the hell up, and they know they should try to save these people, but they're not coordinated. They're new at this. They're in over their heads. And we don't really see the outcome there, but it seems like they've done some real damage by jumping into this situation without without thinking it through. And some other people may really have paid the price for their screw up,
Yeah, and
which raises the stakes a lot from these. Last issue was just these crazy kids running around having fun. Maybe they smoke a little bit when they get a little bit too much sunlight on them. But now we start to see real world consequences start to creep in from the edges, which is what I was wondering about last time. How are they going to go to school? How are they dealing with these downsides? And it's just slowly coming in. I think pretty well crafted here by Mark Millar, who's knows how to write a comic book, to just let us see them still having fun. But now we just see that little bit of, oh, but wait, and oh, uh-oh, did you think of this? And these things that we tell our kids that they never listen to and that we never listened to when our parents told them, but they have to find out through a sad experience.
yeah, yeah, and it's just, I mean, even though, I mean, it's such a cliche to say that you got to invite a vampire into the door. A vampire can't enter a place unless he's invited, and that's so tropey, and yet I was still surprised when Danny got his head blown off because he wasn't invited in, and the guy just pointed his gun in his head and pulled the trigger. That still caught me off guard. So it just goes to show you that you can, depending on how you write it,
It was strangely graphic too. I mean, I don't know what exactly those brain parts were, but it's chunky stuff coming out of his skull. It's pretty nasty for a fun teen book.
Yeah, and it actually makes me wonder. I could probably make a joke about saying, your average teenager can lose half their brain and still be perfectly fine. But it's okay. I got some family members who will get even with me for that comment. But you can't say that because you're a teacher. So, I don't want to get you in trouble. So
I cannot. I do not endorse anything else that has been said on this comic channel.
That's right.
So
it's 100%
after
on me.
that, we haven't checked in with Detective Lascaris at all for almost 2 issues now.
That's right.
And we cut to what seems to be an entirely different story. We see this group of vampire types, in rural Maryland, literally 100 miles away, we're told right in that very first box. And this was a cool little moment where one of them asks a homeowner, "Am I welcome here, friend?" And then the homeowner makes his last mistake ever by saying, "Of course you're welcome." And I think that must be tying in with that whole "you're only allowed to go where you're invited in." So now the vampires rush in, kill all the residents in some really, really gross ways. That picture you have up right now is completely nasty in a pretty good comic way. They they take pictures of themselves killing people. They bring in one of their members is Bloody Mary, who is just this withered old crone in a coffin. We can tell they're super old. They talk about things happening hundreds of years ago. And at the end, we find that one of their members is Lascaris. So either he is way undercover here, which I don't think is true, or he was lying to Danny when he did the whole, "Hey, I'm a detective, we're going to fight the bad guys" thing. So I really wonder, what is he up to? And why did he make Danny into a vampire? What was his plan?
Yeah, that threw me. That threw me. I mean, it is shocking. I would almost think he has to be undercover, and because I'm sure it makes sense that he needs other vampires to maybe help him with his war against other vampire crime, and so he creates his own team and he's undercover. I think that your speculation on that is probably right. I find it hard because why would he be foolish enough to create more vampires that could be potentially used against him if he isn't undercover? But this is Mark Millar, so I'm pretty sure you and I can both expect some further misdirection as this series progresses. And
I think either way, it's kind of inexplicable why he would create a new vampire and then just leave him alone for however long it's been, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm sure there's going to be some explanation there, but I can't think of a good one, and I'm curious what Mr. Miller is going to tell us. So yeah, I think those are the two possibilities. Either he's deep undercover and he got called into this mission at a last second by whoever he works for, or and I'm going to go the other way. I think it's more likely that he was just BSing the whole time about the detective thing. I think he has an entirely different plan, different goals, and I think he's trying to use Danny to do something else, and he just fed him a line.
Yeah, I think
we'll find out next time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I suppose the other, like I said, to build on that, the other possibility is that maybe he wants to use Danny as a way to maybe take out some of his fellow cohorts in crime, and he wants to use Danny to do it as a way of solidifying his own vampiric power or his power base. But it's interesting because as you indicated, he does seem to have vampire members who are very old. They're much older than him. These are, I mean, Danny and Sam and the crew here. They're very inexperienced vampires, and you can tell. So I can imagine these experienced vampires making very short work of them in a very easy manner, unless something happens. I mean, if it's like I say, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen here, because I'm reminded a little bit of American Vampire by Scott Snyder. When I read American Vampire, what was interesting about that story is that one of the central sort of plot points was that at some point, just who you think is a weak vampire ends up being much more powerful for a whole slew of different reasons. And that was some misdirection played there. But I'm pretty sure Mark Millar has his own story he wants to tell here, and I'm looking forward to see what it is.
Yeah, and this is such a contrast with the Art Brut book we just talked about. I think they're both hitting their target, but they're aiming for very, very different targets. Art Brut, Maxwell Prince is aiming for talking about the nature of humanity, the nature of art, the nature of perfection. And Mark Millar is saying, isn't it cool to see a vampire kick somebody's head off? Yeah. Which, again, comic books can do both these things. And just because one is maybe a loftier goal than the other, it doesn't mean we can't have fun messing around with some vampires too.
Yeah, and that's part of the joys of reviewing independent comics as opposed to, I got to say, reviewing DC comics as much as I do, it's nice. One good thing about indie is that far more likely to get a variety of subject matter in the comics we read, good or bad. Sure. So it's good. But so what would you give this?
Oh, yeah. So again, I can't go as high as Art Brut. It's not trying to be as amazing as that. It's again very fast paced, which I enjoy. It had that cool twist at the end, which is a great thing to do in a book like this. The art really sells the violence in the way it's intending to do, which is really gross, but again, hitting the target it's aiming for. I'll give this 8.3 out of 10.
Yeah, I will. I'm gonna go an 8. Just to be. I still want a little bit. I still want a little bit more, and maybe it's such stiff competition this week. I know I'm supposed to evaluate this comic on its own, but I'm really curious to see where this goes. But it feels like especially with that revelation here, I feel that I don't know if I'm going to be that surprised if. I'm thinking Mark Millar is limited as to how he can create misdirection. So I will happily put my foot in my mouth if he does something that surprises me further than he did in this issue. But we shall see. But man, other than we differed on Immortal Sargeant, but we seem to both love Art Brut and Nightclub. And yeah, so overall, I thought this was a good week.
Yeah, it was some fun stuff. A huge range of tones and moods and just methods of doing the art form, which is always a good time. So yeah, thanks for having me back. Always enjoy talking comics.
Well, I want to give a shout out to another comic that I'm hoping to review with you because I know that you and I both have some things to say
Ooh.
about it, just as a tease to other readers, and that is Charles Soule's and Ryan Browne's 8 Billion Genies. And so, just as a quick tease, and I just picked some random issues here. I bought the physical copies of this. The fantastic thing about 8 Billion Genies is that there's multiple printings of all the issues. I think I picked up the 5th printing of issue 1. And I
It
mean, it's just
seems to
crazy.
have really caught on, so which
Yeah.
is a good thing to see an indie book do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's still ongoing. It's an 8 issue series. 7 issues have come out so far, so we don't know how it ends. But the first 7 issues have really told a fascinating story, and I love the structure to it because just to sell the premise, the idea is that one day every human being gets a genie, every human being gets one wish, off you go. And that's the thing. So the first book tells, is it the first 8 minutes in the first book?
I believe so, yes.
Something like that. It
Yeah.
goes like every book is the first 8 something minutes, hours, days, weeks, years. And in the 7th issue, we're up to the first 8 decades. So we've seen all sorts of crazy stuff. And most of our cast of characters is, we're 80 years onward from there. So I'm curious what the first 8 centuries are going to show us in
Yeah.
that final issue. And Charles Soule has done some really good straight up superhero stuff, and he's done some really fun indie stuff. And I think this may be the best of his work that I've read.
Yeah, and you and I would just give a shout out. You and I, Jason, we did review his first issue of Hell to Pay, which it actually has a
That's true.
series coming out. I believe that it's going to have a series coming out on, I don't know, Amazon or Netflix. I don't know, people can Google it, but that was an interesting premise as well. Charles Soule is somebody who he really does have great ideas, and his execution on this 8 Billion Genies is I particularly like. And you want to talk about that old saying, be very, very careful what you wish for. Wow, this went in a direction that, on the surface, it surprised me, and yet in another way, it's of course it would go the direction it did. Of course, humanity would find a way to screw up 8 billion genies, granting your every desire. It's just that's my leave it to humanity to screw up a perfectly good situation. We find a way to screw up everything, and the manner in which that Toro So tells a story, character based, and it's a character based story, and so many different characters with moving parts, and it's just very impressive. So I'm looking forward to that. Just for people listening, Jason and I will be reviewing 8 Billion Genies. We're probably going to review it. I'm hoping that Jason, although you and I might change my mind here and consulting with you, I'm thinking maybe we could talk about this in one sitting and sort of focus on the thematic high points and the points that really spoke to us during the series. And we'll probably wait until the series is actually completed, as I said, because I believe the final issue 8 comes out, is it in March, right?
Yeah, I think the 7th issue kind of just came out a week or so ago.
Right.
Yeah, I think the 7th issue just came out this past week, as far as I can tell. So it's probably about a month until the next one comes out. So yeah, super high concept, but populated with really good characters. And yeah, not to spoil anything else about it, but we both really like it. And if you want to know about it before you hear us jabber about it, you should go buy the book. It's a really
Absolutely, because you're guaranteed your retailer will have copies of it. And nowadays, with speculation and everything else, don't be afraid to buy a second, third, or fourth, or fifth printing, because it might be even worth more than the first printing on something like this. Pick it up, and you got different. You got the genies, the central. I guess the central characters are all these genies who are in this story. There's very creative and imaginative covers, very well done, and yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. But all right. Well, thank you, Jason, for another interesting
Thank you, Rod.
and introspective week of sharing your thoughts on the comics we reviewed. And I would encourage everybody to check out my channel, Comic Boom, for DC comic reviews and these indie comic reviews. I would also encourage everybody to go to Weird Science website. There's Weird Science DC reviews, Marvel reviews, there's manga reviews, and you do some things for Weird Science as well, do you not, Jason?
Yeah, I do with Jim. He and I do a Death Note reading club, so that's its own separate feed where we go chapter by chapter through an amazing manga that actually 8 Billion Genies. I think there's some connections there to be made between those two stories. So you can find me there. And I also do the X-Men podcast, Weird Dose of X, on the Marvel Weird Science feed. And I just recorded one of those this morning with my man Ruben. And we are really enjoying the Sins of Sinister event going on right now. So I know not everyone out there is loving the whole Krakoan era, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had with the Sins of Sinister. So if that sounds like fun to you, please check me out over there.
Yeah, and I'll do my best. I was a little lazy last time. I'll do my best to put the links to those podcasts below
No problem.
on YouTube for this and to promote that. And good. And a shout out to the Get Fresh crew. And
Beep, boop.
yeah. All right. Until next time, Comic Boom out and Jason out. You got to come up
And
with
Jason
the
out.
All right. See you later.